Hey everybody, thank you for watching Leaf by Leaf. To kick off the new year, I would like to do a video that focuses on why we read. So I combed my library and pulled out 31 books that have something to do with why we read or why we should read, and I want to share excerpts from all of them with you. From Aristotle's De Poetica, it is natural for all to delight in works of imitation, and to be learning something is the greatest of pleasures, not only to the philosopher, but to the rest of mankind, however their capacity for it. On the Sublime, Longinus. Literary judgment is the last outgrowth of long experience. These eminent personages are present in our minds and raise us to a higher level of an imaginative power. Of Books by Michel de Montaigne. I get others to say what I cannot put so well myself, sometimes because of the weakness of my languages, and sometimes because of the weakness of my intellect. And from books, all I seek is to give myself pleasure by an honorable pastime, or if I do study, I seek only that branch of learning which deals with knowing myself and which teaches me how to live and die well. The Essay of Studies by Francis Bacon. Read not to contradict and confute, nor to believe and take for granted, nor to find talk and discourse, but to weigh and consider. And reading maketh a full man. The American Scholar by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Books are the best of things, well used, abused among the worst, and they are for nothing but to inspire. And books are for the scholar's idle times. When we can read God directly, the hour is too precious to be wasted in other men's transcripts of their own readings. From the section Reading, from Henry David Thoreau's Waldo. For what are the classics but the noblest recorded thoughts of man? They are the only oracles which are not decayed, and there are such answers to the most modern inquiry in them as Delphi and Dodona never gave. And books are the treasured wealth of the world and the fit inheritance of generations and nations. From Borges's essay, Literary Pleasure. I reread with the pleasure of remembering. From Ezra Pound's essay, How to Read. I do not wish to muddle the reader by making him read more books, but to allow him to read fewer with greater result. Mortimer Adler, How to Read. A book. The art of reading is the process by which a mind, with nothing to operate on but the symbols of the reading matter, and with no help from the outside, elevates itself by the power of its own operations. And a good book can teach you about the world and yourself. Now this one I don't actually have in a book because it's from a lecture. A lot of people know it. It's called Good Readers and Good Writers by Vladimir Nabokov. And he says, the good reader is one who has imagination, memory, a dictionary, and some artistic sense. And he also says a good reader, a major reader, an active and creative reader is a rereader. The Anatomy of Bibliomania, which has been renamed to Book About Books. I like the original name better. Anyway, Holbrook Jackson. Whatever other purposes reading may have, and there are many, it is its own reward. And we may conclude with Bronson Alcott that is a good book which is opened with expectation and closed with profit, provided we agree that profit may differ in kind with every good book. The Great Conversation by Robert M. Hutchins. This is the introductory book to the Britannica Great Books. In a conversation that has gone on for 25 centuries, all dogmas and points of view appear. Here are the great errors as well as the great truths. The reader has to determine which are the errors and which are the truths. And reading will develop the requisite intelligence for democratic citizenship. And the aim of a liberal education is wisdom. Some excerpts from this compendium of C.S. Lewis's literary criticism. These mostly come from an experiment in criticism. Literary experience heals the wound without undermining the privilege of individuality. The man who is contented to be only himself and therefore less a self is in prison. And the reader does not despise real woods because he has read of enchanted woods. The reading makes all real woods a little enchanted. The Books in My Life by Henry Miller. My encounters with books I regard very much as my encounters with other phenomena of life or thought. And read as little as possible, not as much as possible. And what has worth, charm, beauty, wisdom cannot be lost or forgotten. How to Read Slowly by James W. Sire. How far we get, how many books we read must not become the issue. And most of my reading is for perspective. In reading for perspective, we are putting together what should never be split: excitement and knowledge, joy and truth, ecstasy and value. Why read the classics by Italo Calvino? Reading a great work for the first time when one is fully adult is an extraordinary pleasure, for at a mature age one appreciates many more details, levels, and meanings. And a classic is a book which has never exhausted all it has to say to its readers. Realms of Gold by Leland Ryken. A classic has stood the test of time and is still current. And in fact, fiction can illuminate human experience better than facts ordinarily do. Facts by themselves are devoid of meaning and insight. The Western Canon, Harold Bloom. All that the Western Canon can bring one is the proper use of one's own solitude. That solitude whose final form is one's confrontation with one's own mortality. The Great Books by David Denby. Reading the books, the students receive an ethically strenuous education, a set of bracing intellectual habits, among them skepticism and self-criticism. And what can be achieved through culture is the greatest range of pleasure and soulfulness and reasoning power that any of us is capable of. The courses in the Western classics force us to ask all those questions about self and society we no longer address without embarrassment. A History of Reading by Alberto Manguel. Each book was a world unto itself, and in it I took refuge. And reading is cumulative and proceeds by geometrical progression. Each new reading builds upon whatever the reader has read before. The New Lifetime Reading Plan by Clifton Fadiman. Once part of you, these books will work in and on and with you until you die. They should not be read in a hurry. It will merely help to change your interior life into something a little more interesting. How to Read and Why by Harold Bloom. It matters if individuals are to retain any capacity to form their own judgments and opinions, that they continue to read for themselves. And ultimately we read, as Bacon, Johnson, and Emerson agree, in order to strengthen the self and to learn its authentic interests. And the strongest, most aesthetic motive for deep reading of the now much abused traditional canon is the search for a difficult pleasure. The Well-Educated Mind by Susan Wise Bauer. When you read, you develop wisdom. Why Read by Mark Edmondson. The ultimate test of a book, or of an interpretation, is the difference it would make in the conduct of life. And we all get socialized once by our parents and teachers, ministers or priests. Studying the humanities is about getting a second chance. Book by Michael Dirda. It is impossible to read serious novels, poetry, essays, and biographies without also growing convinced that they will gradually enlarge our minds, refine our spirits, make us more sensitive and understanding. Leave Me Alone, I'm Reading by Maureen Corrigan. One of the reasons we read fiction is to fantasize about what might be. And books can give you back your seemingly seamless past and place it right alongside your chaotic present. Francine Prose, Reading Like a Writer. A work of art can start you thinking about some aesthetic or philosophical problem. It can suggest some new method, some fresh approach to fiction. And the better the book I'm reading, the smarter I feel. Or at least the more I'm able to imagine that I might someday become smarter. And literature is an endless source of courage and confirmation. A Reader on Reading. Alberto Manguel, ideal readers do not follow a story, they partake of it. And the ideal reader shares the ethics of Don Quixote, the longing of Madame Bovary, the lust of the wife of Bath, the adventurous spirit of Ulysses, the mettle of Holden Caulfield, at least for the space of the story. And an ideal reader reads to find questions. And writing on the margins is a sign of the ideal reader. Terry Eagleton, How to Read Literature. The most common mistake students of literature make is to go straight for what the poem or novel says, setting aside the way that it says it. The Art of X-Ray Reading by Roy Peter Clark. With age and multiple readings comes insight. And what can I learn from a novel that I can apply to my next story? How can the book become for me a mentor text? And finally, On Reading Well by Karen Swallow Prior. It is not enough to read widely. One must also read well. And the greatest pleasures are those born of labor and investment. And finally, demand books that make demands on you. So that's it. Those are 31 books from which I've taken excerpts on reading. I hope you've enjoyed them. Please, in the comments below, share some of your favorite quotes and excerpts, or just your opinion about why we read, why we should read, and so on. And I wish you all a Happy New Year.